Hey, good morning, good evening, everyone. Based on the time zone where you are, um, my name is Srinivas. As Murat mentioned, I'm working in Visa. So previously, I worked with Cisco for 10 years, and prior to that, few product companies. So there, I had chance to work on machine learning, artificial intelligence, and full stack related products, some of them related to search and content management and smart services related products. So in today's talk, I will focus on few use cases, couple of use cases, which my team has implemented in Cisco as a part of the software development lifecycle. I thought maybe those uh, use cases will help you guys, and I want to cover in generic in those two use cases. I want to cover some of the patterns as well, what we have used in as a part of our projects, and how to address some of the machine learning models deterioration production as well. So with that, so these are the typical machine learning life cycle. I think some of you already. Okay, so like you will have a data in large data lakes, and you extract the data using various techniques, right? And once you have the data, so you do a bit of extrapolation, exploration of the data, and validation of data. Exploration data means like whether any non-values are there, what is the kind of trends in the data, okay, and what fields are there, what fields, right, right? Is there any category fields are there? Is there any numerical fields are there, right? What are the string fields? Those type of right exploration you do, and you do EDA as well, right? Exploratory data analysis as well. So to figure out how the data is distributed, so those kind of stuff, the good stuff. Okay, so then you right, based on the use case, you figure out some of the data maybe needs to be cleaned, and the way you want to infer, so then where data cleaning can happen, and some of the missing values, those kind of things, even you may impute. Okay, so then the entire data you may divide into three sets of kind of data, maybe the training data, the test data, and the validation data. So assume like, right, based on the use case, based on the data available, right, maybe some people will use 70% of the data as the training data and 30% of the data the test data. Okay, that depends on the use case to use case, depends on how much data you have it. Once you have that, right, you have the training data and test data, then you use the feature engineering basically, right? Like what type of features you have to extract based on the data, and you use the machine learning model, right? Either classification or clustering. Uh, that depends on the use case itself. And or you can use deep learning models as well. If it is image recognition, you use CNNs, right, or graph embeddings or whatever, right? Like you build your model. So once the model is built, and then you train the model with your training data, and you can use some of the hyperparameters as well for tuning, like number of layers in the, if it is a deep learning model, number of layers, and then what is the kind of if it is overfitting or underfitting, what kind of dropout. So these are some of the hyperparameters tuning you can tune it. Then there are a bunch of open source products are there for hyperparameter tuning as well, right? Like Optuna is one of the one. Okay, and once you have that, then you train your model, and then you figure out what is the kind of accuracy you are getting it. Okay, so assume like if you are using a right, like regression models are right, like random forest. Assume like for a model is a classification, then maybe you can have ensemble of models as well, and then figure out what is the best model is giving a highest accuracy of the results. Once you decide that the model and the accuracy, once you are satisfied, okay, either it can be precision or recall. If it is a text to voice, so then word error rate. So there are, for each of these models, right, based on the use case, then there are different accuracy metrics you have to follow. And once the model is done, you are satisfied with the model results, and then you have validated with your test data as well. Assume like with the test data also you're getting this more or less similar kind of accuracy. So then you can, right, you can figure out saying that, hey, now my model is ready. Okay, so then you can put it in the production itself. Right? You can use various tools to deploy like Qflow or MLflow, right, to capture all the data sets, model results, model parameters, hyperparameters, everything. Okay. So then that model you can deploy into the production. Then similarly, like once the model is deployed in the production, it will serve the inferencing basically for the clients. So then parallelly you have to monitor the model as well. Okay. And then figure out whether the model accuracy is still continuously the same way, right? And then some of the logging, those kind of things also you can do it. So assume like the model, I will cover one or two slides and what kind of patterns you have to use if the model is deteriorating and all. But this is at a high level how the typical, right, machine learning life cycle is followed various organizations. Typically, there are various teams in enterprise organizations. I'm not sure about startups, but in large companies, there are three different teams, especially in Cisco and in other companies as well, which I know. So what the first team is the innovation and research team. So what this team does is, but typically they conceptualize the right, identify the use case for a given business problem. Okay, and this particular, right, since it's a research team, they will not be in large numbers, so there will be in the small number, and then this particular team does the proof of concepts, right? Hey, this particular for this particular business problem or for this particular technical problem, they develop the proof of concept and say that, hey, it works, kind of stuff. Okay, so then identify the right small scale data sets, and they do the exploratory data analysis. They use the training, test, validation, these kind of data sets, they prepare it, and then they develop the models. Okay, and they train the model, they execute the models, and then if it is overfitting or underfitting, right, address the models accordingly, right? If it is overfit, then you may say some of the dropouts. If it is underfit, then you can add much more features, right? And then figure out the accuracy, and then they do the A/B testing, right? Basically, for every problem, they may develop a couple of models and then see which model is working better, which is giving accuracy. Okay, so then they say that, right, basically this particular team is responsible for the proof of concept with the smaller data sets, and then, right, they may use Python on scikit-learn, or for that matter, maybe any of the frameworks like TensorFlow or PyTorch, whatever framework they want to use it, they use it. And then the main goal is basically the concept works and that can be productized. Okay. So the typical engineering teams, right, here most of the people will be in the data scientist itself. Okay. So once this model works and is prioritized by leadership team to go for a full pressure product, okay. So then the engineering team it's basically, right, like they're given handout to engineering team. So here, so the engineering teams has to do, they have to work with large data sets. In the proof of concept, it may work with the smaller data sets, but here they have to do in billions of right, data sets. So that's why they have to do a data preparation, extraction, cleaning, data validation, data pipeline. The same steps needs to be done in the POC as well, but in the POC with the smaller data sets, but here with the larger data sets. So that's why here the engineering team has to make sure that whatever the data they extracted, right? And the ETL pipeline also is very performance oriented stuff, right? And then it can scale. That's what. And then they come up with right, different set of ML models, or they can reuse the same models whatever they used in the proof of concept stage itself. Okay, so in my opinion, what happened is sometimes like the in few scenarios the POC models doesn't scale well and during the productionization and during the right in the large scale. So we have changed the clustering algorithm as well from what they used in the POC to in the production as well. Okay, so this may or may not be applied in all use cases. And once that is done, so then like the same kind of steps, right? You deploy the models in the production. Now here you have to use the serving the ML models also, right? In case of POC, you do it the smaller, right? The smaller data sets, and then the inferencing may not be with the large scale here, but in the serving also it's a very critical. Once the model in the production, then the clients will make use of right. They send them right millions of requests or thousands, right, or billions of requests. So then how you will scale it? So that's where the engineering team has to make sure what the different serving platforms are there, right? Whether if the models are built in Ray, so they can use Rayserve. Otherwise, they can use a Clipper. That's also from Berkeley. So Clipper can provide fantastic serving platform so that it's uniformly the ML models can be accessed. Whether the model can be developed in scikit-learn or PyTorch or TensorFlow, it doesn't matter, right? If you use a Rayserve, it will take care of the most of the underlying cooking stuff. So then once these models are ready, it's serving. So then basically, right, you to instrument the ML code such that for logging and right for the metrics and then performance and accuracy monitoring as well. So that's why the frameworks like MLflow is automatically logs your model data, okay, and right, and then you can add additional metrics as well. And apart from this, then we have to develop shadow models as well, so that I have one slide for the why we have to develop shadow models apart from the main model. And once everything is working, so then we can tune some of these hyperparameters as well and other system parameters as well, okay, from end to end. So here the kind of engineers which we require is data scientists and full stack developers, okay? And sometimes we need for the data extraction also, right? We need database developers as well to extract the data, right? The data can be in NoSQL or SQL, or it can be in the cloud, right? So that's the reason. So then once the model is ready and then everything is working, so it's productized and then it is deployed in the production. So then you can give it to operations team. So the operations team, they are typically involved earlier before the machine learning era, monitoring and right, working on standard operations processes to address any right outage issues, deploying new patches, those kind of stuff, right? The standard ITSM process itself. So basically here, right, they have to set up the infra setup, right, and the data center setup. In case of machine learning, so they may have to set up the right infrastructure which is required for GPUs or CPU in a large scale. So once they set up that, so then you can deploy these models on the GPU based as well. Okay, and that team is basically the monitors the ML models, whatever the instrumentation is done by the engineering team. And if the models are iterating or maybe if any kind of system errors occurs, then they can raise ticketing systems and work with engineering teams to address. And similarly, right, if any model is decay, so then they should be able to work with engineering teams and address the model itself. Okay, enforce the ITSM process, right, like a standard process itself. So I cover like a couple of use cases. Basically, 3 use cases I cover, which we have worked extensively in Cisco, and then they deployed in the production as well. So one is basically right observability as well. So if you see that the traditional observability techniques, what they do is typically, so most of the things are based on the rule base, right? So they use static threshold. If the CPU utilization more than 90%, you raise an alert. Okay. If the if a disk utilization is greater than 85%, then raise an alert. But these are all not a proper way of doing it, because there is a static threshold. In one particular point of time, the system may be executing a lot of load. So that's why the CPU utilization may be greater than 80%, but after that, it may come down to normal state. But once you use the static thresholds, what happens is it continuously raises that, then it will trigger a lot of false alarms, right? False, and then it may end up with alarm storm as well. Okay, so that is a disadvantage of using the static rule-based monitoring, right? Systems. So we implemented machine learning based. This is basically right like the time series data. Okay, so we evaluated a couple of frameworks, like and then used some of the frameworks like Arima, Sarima, and right like which some things will work with the trend, right? If it is the last 4 weeks, the CPU utilization may be trending, or maybe last 10 weeks, right? Or maybe in one particular seasonality, right? Maybe during weekends, some of the some systems maybe needs high load, right? Or maybe during festival seasons, the seasonality, right? So that, and then we want to work with multivariant time series analysis as well. It's not like one CPU utilization, right? We want to figure out whenever CPU utilization is very high in one particular system, is there any other system? Maybe if you assume like if you are using messaging, another messaging system using Kafka, right? And then see what is the Kafka, right? Is there any messages are too high in the Kafka, or right? Is there any lag in the Kafka messaging system, right? So then you want to correlate and then figure out what needs to be done, okay? And then raise the alarms accordingly itself. Okay. So we use the core time series data analysis, and we experimented with various anomaly detection frameworks, and then we come up with our own framework. So that framework we are calling as the Weather. So myself and some of my colleagues in Cisco, we published a paper in Archive. We are calling as like accountable behavior change detection. Basically, most of the time series analysis and anomaly detection frameworks that doesn't provide right explainability itself. So we want to build the explainability also in the framework itself. So that's what we did, and people are interested, they can go and read this paper. Okay, and we have tried various small things to remove the white noise, and then to figure out the trend, right, and a few other things as well. And we benchmarked the weather with Numenta anomaly detection benchmark dataset, and we compared with the framework and algorithm whatever we implemented with right HMT and as well as jitter adwork as well. Okay, this is like hierarchical temporal models from Numenta, and with various data sets we benchmark it, and in most of the cases we are able to right detect the false positives, and right basically if you see the true positives, the false positives are very less in with weather itself. Okay, in particular this like a request latency system failure, this particular data set, the false positives is where the Numenta is like 9, but with weather we are able to detect only 1 false positive. So right, and the this is the crux, right? Like if you have less false positives, okay. So if you see in one case like a Twitter volume from the Facebook, right? So this is the this with the Twitter adwork is very old one, right? So they have a lot of false positive, but with weather we have only one false positive itself. If people are interested, they can go through that, and then please, right? If you have any questions, then right, send me an email. So we will look, right? We will provide like whatever any help is required on that. So the next use case I want to cover is the duplication of bugs in bug systems. So if you see, I read a paper in Firefox, if you see that the number of bugs people raise, since it is open source, around 20 to 30% of the bugs are duplicates. So in order to address a duplicate bug, right, it requires extensive amount of effort and time. Basically, where someone has to manually verify whether the particular bug is a duplicate or not, and if it is duplicate, then they have to communicate with the whoever is the submitter, saying that hey, this particular bug, whatever you filed, is a duplicate. So in any enterprise, right, in most of the enterprises, this will be common. It may not be 30% of the bugs are duplicate in their system, maybe 10%, 10%. Right? That this varies from enterprise to enterprise. So we want to solve this as well. Okay, so basically the bugs is the input here, and we do a each bug has, there are certain fields. The bugs here, we have our own bug system, but this can be used for any bug system, right? Like Bugzilla or any open source bugs. Also, this can be applied. So then we do the pre-processing and then do the feature extraction. And these models are pretty simple. So we use the random forest model, okay? And the key thing is in the feature extraction and what kind of features we have to extract in that, and then how to do it. And then whenever a new bug comes, right? So for the new bug also we do the pre-processing and then feature extraction, and then give it to the ML model, so which serves that, and then it can return if a particular, what is the probability of the duplicate bugs. So basically the serving layer will return so a bunch of bugs and their probability, whether 90% duplicate, right, or what is the probability of 70%, 60%. So that kind of stuff itself. This also is implemented in the production, and we have this system we are calling is Advaita. So the Veda and Advaita, these are all the Sanskrit language names. Okay, so Advaita means there is no duplicate, right? So that is the reason we want to use the duplicate. Unique, Advaita means it's unique. So we want to figure out the uniqueness in the bugs, and then we published a paper in arXiv. If people are interested, right, they can go through that. So what the typical the duplicate bug system, what, as I mentioned, like we have each bug has a headline, and that's basically very concise description of the issue. Then each bug has a detailed description and what is which project, which product, component, right? These are the fields. Some of the things will vary, right, from each different organization, whether it's a hardware bug or a software bug. And the severity, right, like whether it is a high severity, medium, low, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it works. And then what is the bug status, right? Whether it is new bug or the bug is assigned to one particular engineer, right? Whether it's a whether the bug is already addressed or duplicate, so and so forth kind of stuff. So as a part of the feature extraction, we extract all the bugs, okay, and we convert the entire the complete bug into lowercase letters, and we remove stop words, and then remove the non-ASCII characters, and basically like if the bug is related to, if they mention any MAC address, right, or any IP addresses, so that we replace, and then we with the general keyword, and right, so in that way it is it is not specific to any particular post. And file paths, right, that's also is replaced with the file path keyword. And basically for them in our case, what we observed is if the bug length is less than 20 characters, so then we are not able to detect, right, the probability of detection of the bugs is not matching. So then we consider the bug, the description, at least if it is less than 20 words, then we are removing it. That bug is not considered as a part of the pipeline, as a part of the training data set itself. So then as a base of that, then we have several features. basically, right, like for a given bug, and then the right for the incoming bug as well, we calculate the length of the two bugs. We calculate how many words are there, how many unique words are there, and then how many sentences are there as a part of the bug description, right? As I mentioned here, bug text headline and then description. So both these two things will be used, and common word counts, right? Like then various distances as well, right? So we use the Fuzzy Wuzzy open source package also, okay? And we use the Fuzzy Wuzzy distance as well, and then various context related features, and some of these distances also we use the distance feature as well. And the entire thing we have documented, right, as a part of this paper itself. So we got like very good results. And then here the challenging is the scaling itself. Assume like if you have millions of bugs in your database, right? And how you have, right, how you will convert, right, for an incoming bugs comes. So then you have to, right, measure the distance between the incoming bugs to the, right, the set of bugs which are there in our entire data, in our entire database. So that's why we come up with saying that, hey, narrow down if the particular bug is related to one particular project or one particular product, right? And right, and then for that particular component, we have narrowed down that, and then basically the set space is reduced, and we experimented few other things as well. And right, and then we tried the word embeddings, right? Word to vec. There are various right features we tried, and the model in right, we use the XGBoost framework, okay, and with that we are able to achieve a good accuracy, and this is validated with some of the different teams as well, okay, that moved into the production as well, okay. So this is helping the quality assurance team. So they make sure that before filing any bug as a duplicate, they check with this tool and then see. And still, there are some false positives are there, but still, the right, this is helping them a lot. So the next use case is basically we want to find the defects in the software source code, automatically detect the defects. Okay, so we want to write basically. We have a lot of right, like vulnerabilities, security vulnerabilities, and each device can have a right several right, like security vulnerabilities. That's we call it as CWEs. So then these vulnerabilities we want to right detect or like right, like predict once as soon as the software code is submitted. Okay, so basically like we use Git, and earlier we use the Bitbucket, but that's fine. Like we use, and it doesn't matter like whatever version management system which you are using it. So the each developer will right submit their code, and if it is a right Git, we can have right, there are event listeners are there. You can make use of the event listeners, and then look for the statements, right? The comments, like whether it is a bug fix or it's like CVE or whatever the text you want to say it. So they take that, and you know the previous version of the code, and then what is the current version of the code, right? So that you can make use of, right, the previous version and then current version, the diff. The diff you can put it into one particular data store, or maybe you can take it like the previous version and label that particular previous version of the source code as a classify as a like a buggy, right? And then the next version is a fixed version. So that is one way of that is another data store we can do it, okay. Or what you can do is instead of right, the label instead of buggy, what you can do is like the previous version, the fixed version, you can have it as a, you can tag with that particular CVE itself, okay. So then for each CV, each security vulnerability has a particular code will be there. You can tag that, right? You can tag the particular entire source code of the particular file, or right? You can make it as like a, you can label that as like right fix for the particular CV itself. So this is the in the, in the data preparation. So the once you have the right all the data in this particular data store, it can be a high, right? It can be a Hadoop data system itself, or any which whatever whatever it works for you, or maybe it can be another branch in the same Git or Bitbucket, right? You can extract and then store it into that particular as well. So this becomes your right data for your training and test data. Once this particular data is there, you can develop the machine learning model. So what we did is we tried with Word2Vec using GenSim, okay, and then deep learning also, right? Like using PyTorch also, it's pretty simple to generate the word embeddings. That's so then the entire source code we have that, like, right, from the source code, each file is generated with the word embeddings and then classify whether it is a buggy code or not buggy code itself, right? So this is one way of simple way of doing with the Word2Vec itself. But this is not sufficient. What we are doing is for the entire source code, right? If it is a Java file, for the entire Java file, we are generating the Word2Vec, right? Word2Vec and then embedding 300 dimensional space and that. Okay. So the word embeddings and then the final word embeddings is becomes as a right like features. So then you generate using the classifier itself, whether it's a buggy code or a proper code itself. Okay. And if any new file comes, then you can generate the word embeddings and then see whether they have potential, right? Whether potential. There are two classes in this case, right? Buggy or non-buggy kind of thing itself. Okay. So with this, we are not getting good accuracy results. So then we analyze what other people are doing it, and then we want to experiment code-to-vector itself, right? So the code-to-vector model is like basically they generate the context vectors. They generate basically for entire source code. They use they create the abstract syntax trees, ASTs, and the ASTs from the AST they generate the context paths. Okay, and they use the attention layers as well. At the end, they use the softmax. So the softmax layer here also, right? Like the softmax, we are also using it with the simple word embeddings as well. But the entire source code is converted into right word embeddings. But here the ASTs are generated and context paths are generated. People can read about more about this, how they're doing it. Okay, and right, they use the code-to-vector the model. Okay, and and then finally they use the attention weights as well. For some parts they have the more attention weights. Okay, once the AST parts are identified, and then finally it generates the predictions itself. So we trained using the code-to-vec, right? Like the same kind of model we tried. Once we initially we used the code-to-vector model as is, and but here the intention is for them to generate the the method names, right? The function names they generated by default, whatever the code-to-vector model comes. So we use the same principles and then tried with our own right. Here we want to predict the classification. Here it's basically whether it's a buggy or non-buggy, and then similarly, right, we want to predict the next version is basically we want to have a multi-label classification. That's where for each vulnerability, right, each bug becomes a potential classifier for this code-to-vector as well. Okay, and we experimented with smaller data sets, and then later we experimented with millions of right, the source code which is built on millions as well. So that's also is working fine with the code-to-vector model. And once you have the model, as I mentioned, so you can right, basically this we want to integrate with an IDE as well. Before I will come to the integration, so we want to deploy in the non-production and see which model works, right? As I mentioned, Clipper we used for right for the Word2Vec, and then TensorFlow server we use for the code-to-vec. Okay, and then there are some of the engineers will use right when they do the model for the serving, right? They use Word2Vec model, right, using the Clipper, and some of the engineers, right, like when they check the code, then the TensorFlow server basically, right, the code-to-vector model is served to the inference itself. So based on this, we right, for our data sets, right, the code-to-vector model is working fine. So then we deployed this code-to-vector model in the production itself. So it suggests like in non-prod, it's always better to do case-less B testing, right, and then figure out which model is the works for your environment itself. So once the once we decided the model, so what we use the MLflow Right, MLflow is open source one. So basically, with MLflow, we can run the metrics as well, right? What are the accuracy metrics? Okay, so for each iteration or for a, right? So that we experimented and then we log the metrics as well. Okay, and right, all engineers will make use of the right, like the models, these two models, either word2vec or code2vec. For each of these things, we have instrumented the necessary logging and the necessary accuracy metrics as well. Okay, I suggest strongly MLflow is like a nice open source framework. People can make use of that to log out to make sure all our experiments are version controlled, so that at any time, right, you will be able to back to whichever experiment or whichever version of their model, and then right you can deploy the same model or then enhance the model as required itself. Okay, it's a simple one, MLflow. It works with various frameworks as well, and basically, right, like whenever we have one particular thing, always try to observe like what the various benchmarks or related machine learning benchmarks are available, right, on that particular use case itself. In our case, like basically, right, we want to use on the defect detection. So we like basically, right, we tried and then we figured out CodeXclude is the one which has right from the Microsoft. They have given open source as well. So they have experimented with a lot more right, with various programming languages, right, with C, C++, okay, and right, the data sets is basically like around 28,000 labeled functions, okay. The Divine is the benchmark data sets, and then basically, right, whether it's a vulnerable, non-vulnerable train data, right, and test data and validation data. They experimented with various right models, like one is the bidirectional STM, text CNN, CodeVet, and all. Okay, so we also use the same kind of with our data, right? With our source code. Our source code is much higher, and the label also which we have very high, right? It's not just like 28K. We have large data set, okay, and with the code in our case, code2vec is working fine, right? We are able to get the better results, okay, when compared to bidirectional LSTM as well, which we have experimented with word2vec also. Okay, so basically my suggestion is figure out what the different benchmark data sets are available in your use case itself, so that it will be easier to compare your machine learning models with the standard benchmark data sets and see whether we can leverage some of the benchmark data sets with the same model, whatever you pick, and then see whether it works or not. Okay, so these are all the open source, like the crowdsourced benchmark data sets. So that will be which easier, right, to take it and then right and learn some of the learnings as well from there. And see and one more thing is like once in the production, as I mentioned, right, like always follow this model wherever it is appropriate, wherever it is makes sense. So this is a standard model called Challenger and Champion pattern. So this is basically what you do is, right, you deploy your model, okay, and that particular model will work as a champion. So basically, right, so that model will serve all your clients, right, for inferencing and all. Along with this model, you deploy other models as well as a shadow models, right? See, assume like in this particular thing, assume like CodeVet, right? So this is working, right, and you're getting a very high accuracy results. So what you can do is you can make that particular model as a champion model, and this model will serve all our clients. But at the same time, right, either you can deploy like another model called word2vec or maybe code2vec or bidirectional STM. So these models also will be running in the production, but they will not serve the clients, right? Only all the requests will come to code, right? This model A2. So A2 will provide the inferences, but A1, A3, and A4. So these models, right? So what happens is these models will be offline, will right figure out for the same inferencing. So these models also will be do offline, right? It's a bit of sorry, it requires a bit of more hardware. Okay, so basically at the same time, right? So one model is working as a inferencing, right? And the remaining models we can do in a asynchronously or maybe offline itself. It may not be like batch processing. So maybe for the end of the day, assume like this code to bat is serving maybe right like maybe a million requests. So the same million requests sent to this A2, A3, A4 as well, and then see what is the kind of accuracy, and then compare with A2, right? A2 model itself. Okay. So over a period of time, assume like A2 model is iterating, right? Right. The model performance is not good, but at the same time, right? Code to vector model A3 is doing very well, right? When you are doing the batch offline itself, right? It's not actively serving, but this particular A1, A3, A4 becomes like a challenger model, right? So there are practical limitations will be there, and it's not very easy to implement these things. Okay, so but like right, based on the use case, based on the business, how you want to, right? Some businesses will require very high accuracy, and then right, and then impacts a lot of business and revenue as well. So that's why we prefer like right having a challenger champion model as well. These challengers will continue to challenge if the model is deteriorating. So then one of the challenger will become whichever is the challenger have a higher accuracy. So that guy will become a champion. Okay. So then assume like if code to vector is doing well, in this case, if defect detection use case, so this becomes a challenger. The remaining three will become a right. Sorry, the code to vector become a champion. The remaining three becomes a challenger model. So why, right? Why the machine learning models deteriorate, right? And when we have to retrain the model, or when we have to completely rebuild the model. Okay. So typically, right, whenever the changes in the data set, not originally itself. Assume like in this particular use case, whatever I'm giving it, if the machine learning models are trained with JDK 1.5, assume like the entire source code is written in Java, and assume like they don't use any generics, right? In JDK 1.5, even though they are using that. Okay. So, but like the next, as a right, but the inferencing has to be done with the code which is using extensively generics, right? So basically, that right, the as I mentioned, like there is a change in the data set. The data set, whatever we trained, doesn't use generics, but that data set, whatever is unit inference, that is using generics, right? So that time sometimes it may impact the model's performance as well. And similarly, the model is trained in one particular version, okay, but inference has to be done in a different version of the language. And as long as the language has the backward compatibility, that should be fine. But sometimes what happens is a lot of new features will make, right? Will add it. So in that case, if any code is make use of this new code, right, then the machine learning model, right, it may not be able to generalize in some cases. So that's why whenever there is a change in the data set, right, right, like with machine learning models may deteriorate, or right, you may need to require a retrain or rebuild itself. And similarly, there are new labels and classes itself. So these vulnerabilities, right, like last year vulnerabilities, right, like the last year bugs, you are trained on the new, and you are trained on your machine learning models with existing bugs and existing vulnerabilities. But like, right, there are a lot of new vulnerabilities, right, keep on coming during the COVID situation, right? There are so many, right, security vulnerabilities. People are trying to explore it. So which may not be there in the existing source code itself, right? Or maybe existing in the classes or labels which we don't have it. So over a period of time, like this new security vulnerabilities, right? So then, so this also needs to be predicted. Okay. So that's why, right, whenever a right, majority of the classes, new classes or labels are added, so you may have to retrain or rebuild the model itself. Okay. And similarly, right, completely no new architecture with high accuracy. Assume like the complete model you have trained in GPT-2, right, using GPT-2, but like over a period of time, GPT-3, right? Now you know like GPT-3 and it has a high accuracy and then right, and then not the complete model, maybe right, the medium model which can be utilized, right? And then in that case, that's why. So whenever you have a new architectures and new research is right in parallel is working. So maybe you have to consider the new types of ML models based on the new research, right? And then see whether it works for your model, right? If it works, so then you can retrain and rebuild the model itself. Okay? And then there are a bunch of like I have not covered with the right hyperparameter tuning open source frameworks and all. So that also can be utilized, but there are other parameters as well, right? Sometimes why the model iterates, but these are all the right the major scenarios which we observed and then address it accordingly. Okay. That's all from my side. I've not planned for a 2-hour session. Sorry, and yeah, thanks for the team for providing me this opportunity. And we can go ahead for any types of questions which I'm able to answer. If I'm not, then I'll check with my colleagues, right, and then provide the responses. Okay. Thank you. So in the chat, I have to do Murat. Hello. Hey, can you guys hear me? Yeah. Okay, someone can turn off the recording so that we can have a questions. Okay. Hey, the one question, someone asked like in the part of the research, innovation in research, the people may use the smaller data sets, whether they use Excel or Python. So Excel and all is right. Excel typically right. If they want to do clustering and then write a lot more ML stuff, so with Excel they will not be able to do it. So that's why in most of the enterprises, as a part of the research team, they use Python extensively. And in my experience, so the research team used Python. So when we took it from I played both the roles as a part of the research side as well as the engineering side. In that particular use case, so Python is not scaling well. So that's why when we move to the production, so we use the Scala, Spark ML, we used it. Okay. We can try with the PySpark as well, PySpark with Python, but in the POC they use the pure Python with, but like when we tried to productionize that use case, we tried Scala and Spark ML, right? So the Spark is a distributed processing, so we use the Spark machine learning, right? The next question is like someone asked, other than the Euclidean distance, which of the other 6 distances you mentioned have found to be most useful and for what? So basically, right, like we covered with various fuzzy as well, right? So with that also is we are getting much more accuracy, right? So that internally will make use of these right edit distances based kind of stuff. Okay. Okay. So someone asked for bug detection project, how do you reduce the search space? Did you use approximate nearest neighbor search when comparing the word embeddings? How large was your search space? Okay. So here, like initially, as I mentioned, like the bugs are in right, like in the if you take the existing bugs, right, maybe a period of 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, right? So then it will large. Okay. So and in each bug has certain fields. Okay. So when a new incoming bug is coming, so we know that the bug is what right. Take for example in Quora.com, right? People can post the bugs in different groups, right? The bug can be related to Python, it can be related to Tomcat, it can be related to okay, right? There are various languages and then various right components and all. So here, what we reduce, we come up with right when a particular bug is filed. So we predominantly initially we focused in all areas, right? If the particular bug is filed in Python also, we used to search either in Java language or it can be right in we have not narrowed down the particular right component itself, but later we narrowed down the particular component based on the field whatever it is filed in the bug detection system itself, right? So as a part of the bug, so we have not used any nearest neighbor search or kind of stuff. Okay, so what we tried is we took the bugs component, bugs project, and bug product. Okay, so earlier we used to section all components. So now what we are in all components is giving lot more right less accurate results. So that's why we right initially we have over goal. Okay, we don't want to trust the submitter and then search on the entire search space, but later that is giving a large right, because like if for each incoming bug, if you want to compare the edit distances with the existing all right millions of bugs, so then it will become end up with right we are ROI is not so good. So that's why we change the direction and then reduce the search space, like using the submitters, whatever the submitter submits, and use the make use of the components itself, right, rather than selecting all the components. So the next question is someone asked is for the challenger champion model performance monitoring, how does one get accuracy in production? Okay, what is the ground truth and where you get it from? Good. So what we can do is like as a part of the right what as I mentioned, like you can try the model and then do the right accuracy, and then that you log it, and then you can make use of as a accuracy results. So what you can do is you use the same at the end of the day as a part of the batch processing. You take all the inference and request and then give one shot, right, and then note down the right accuracy itself. So you can use MLflow for that, right? And at the same time, you can figure out like for all the other models as well, not only the champion model, for the challenger models as well. Offline, you can do it. And again, right, like here you have to see like whether you want to assume like for that day, if you are serving million requests, for all million requests, you want to figure out on the right accuracy, and maybe you can take right as a you can do some sampling, right? Maybe 100 requests take and then see what is the kind of accuracy you are getting it. Okay, in that way you will be able to do it right accuracy in the production as well. Okay, I think right. So the next one is how do you measure the model right iteration in production itself. So as I mentioned, right, like you should be able to figure out the based on the accuracy is one of the metric. Okay, and see, right, like assume like word error rate, text to speech, right? So or sorry, speech to text. So then you can figure out word error rate. How many word error rates are from right like each time when you're doing inferencing itself. Okay. So you can use the right MLflow kind of stuff, so which can do the logging and then monitoring. Okay, And this accuracy metrics also you have to log as a part of your standard instrumentation, and right, and then periodically you can monitor, right, see how the accuracy trends are growing, and then you can use plot different graphs and then figure out whether the model is iterating or not. Okay, so can you clarify why Scala works better for your over PySpark? See, the PySpark in our case, we have to, the data is like very huge, right? We have that needs to run in right in multiple clusters, okay, and then sometimes it used to take almost like 48 hours to completely run the model itself, okay. So that's why we tried with Scala, okay, and rather than PySpark, okay. So we don't want, right, we want to avoid that PySpark layer itself, right, PySpark layer, and then directly go with the Scala and JVM implementation. See, what were other functions besides clustering that you need that are not in Excel for innovation research purpose and all? So there are so many things, not right. Excel is not the one to do. We will not be able to do all the things in Excel itself, right? So the text processing itself, the text needs to be converted into, right? We have to convert the input text into n-gram indexes, right? So that we cannot do in Excel, right? There depends on the use case to use case itself. Okay. For someone new to topics covered in this presentation, what study resources do you recommend to for productionizing ML models? So I suggest like there are various courses, right, from Udacity or Coursera or from the same guys, right, like from these guys as well. Make use of them. Or for beginners, I suggest like right, like machine learning crash course from Google, right? So that is forgot. Maybe I will send it later, right? That is a very nice course. So that covers TensorFlow and how to do versioning, right? And various aspects as well. So then MLflow also very nice one. So that's also will be very useful. Okay, people can make use of that for versioning and then right, monitoring metrics, everything that's also like complete life cycle. You should be able to use MLflow as well. Yeah. So someone mentioned, right, like for the use case of the AI ops, right? So we tried with the Arima, Sarima, and right, like they have not suited for the use case, right? And then the mainly accountability also missing, okay, explainability. So that's why we come up with our own, and there is a paper called Plex, right? PLEX. So I suggest that read about that paper. So that we mentioned in our paper itself. Okay. So we took some of the core right functions from that Plex. So that is basically right, which they use to right for figuring out whether based on the syslogs, they want to figure out whether a particular router will failure, right? They want to predict, right, based on the syslog, whether a router or a switch. That they use some function. So that we use, that is called YIN. Okay, that function we implemented in weather as well. Okay. The time series data here itself, right? So someone asked like whether you use AWS or GCP for your time series analysis and anomaly detection. So the data here, the complete time series data is stored in the MongoDB. Okay. So the right, MongoDB is the becomes like right, the source data for the time series detection. Again, it doesn't matter, right? Whatever the data extraction may be changed, right? The data can come from anywhere itself. Okay. Yeah, what would you recommend between Qflow and MLflow? So some of my Cisco colleagues also worked on Qflow, and right, like so the Qflow is not just for like, right, it has like bunch of other open source right, like frameworks, and then other frameworks also is right as a part of the Qflow. Okay, so and MLflow is easier to use. Okay, so and it can work with across various frameworks, and they have built nice wrappers as well. Okay, so QFlow is a little complicated, some learning curve, but MLflow is much easier one. This is my opinion. Yeah. So any more questions? Otherwise, yeah, I think the slides will be posted, right? So people can make use of that, or otherwise, like maybe I will send these links. Okay, and even though the topic is right, like machine learning models and software, AI, and ML, maybe I will post some of the things like what kind of machine learning models can be used for, right, automatic code reviews, and similarly, right, how to generate the UI, right, the pixel to UI, and right, UI to pixel, right, code to pix kind of stuff. So maybe I will post some of these things as well later. Yeah, the papers itself. Yeah. The each project, right, it took different life cycles, right? So one project, it took more than 1.5 years as well. Okay, and this bug detection and all we tried is like just like in 1 quarter itself, from concept to production. Okay, but system will take it took sorry, not bug detection system, the defect detection. So that took a longer time, and because that needs to be right, like it needs to be accepted by the right, developers and testers as well. Okay, so the AI ops project, it took almost like that is the first paper we published, so that's why we took a longer time for in archive to basically write for the paper acceptance, and it's also took almost like 1 quarter from end to end itself. And then again, here, right, number of people are just like 3 to 4 people working on the project itself, not huge people, right? Not large number of people and all. Yeah, I think someone is asking like, right, like when you have found Bray, Curtis, Jacquard, and Canberra distances to be useful. So we experimented various distances, right? And Euclidean distance, Jacquard distance, and all. And I didn't remember exactly. I have to refer the paper. So this we did almost like 3 years back. Okay, and right, uh, e- each of these distances, right, like have a different for some bugs they are helpful, so for some bugs it is not helpful, right? And I didn't remember right, like exactly what is the which one has the high importance, right? So maybe I can go through the paper and then come back again on this. Okay. how did you handle any special handling done for missing data in AOPS data? So the missing data, right? We have various, various techniques we can use. We can take the like average data, right? Or like there are average of the previous 5 intervals, right? So here it's basically right the and then at the same time we want to correlate with other systems data as well, right? Maybe in one particular parameter may be missing, right? Assume like during maintenance window of one particular server, right? Maybe 1 hour you don't have the data, okay? But at the same time, the other servers, maybe the Kafka is serving, right? So if you're doing the rolling updates, maybe one server you have missing data, but the other servers have data, right? So we consider the other servers data as well, right? Wherever, and then basically they all right, using the load balancer, we distribute the load across all the servers in the same. Okay, it is a round robin way of distributing the data. Okay, it's not based on the, because all the servers have the same number of capacity and all, right? The CPU, memory, and disk and all. So that is one way of we handled in case of AOPS missing data. Again, we did it in the streaming side, right? So that's why we want to do right, like calculate the moving averages, right? And when we are doing in the streaming side, so what we do is, as soon as the system starts, we don't take it. Almost like 400 to 500 points data we collect it, and then from there we start doing the inferencing part itself. Okay. In case of batch, it makes sense, right, to use, right, historically what the data is missed, okay, and then figure out. So that we tried, especially with the syslog based device failures prediction. So that's where we use the neighboring devices as well, and their data is also considered for the same kind of syslog messages and all. Right. So in the AOPS case, this is like a streaming data. So first 500 points we don't collect, we don't do any kind of inference, but from there we figure out, right, what is the trend seasonality over a period of time and all. So that we will keep on calculating behind the scenes.